Oh no, not another Tarantino video essay. Well, I'm showing my face in this one. And that doesn't usually happen in these kind of videos, so that's different. Go fuck yourself, your mum's a whore. You ever had anyone call your mum a whore on a video essay? No, I didn't think so. I'm gonna try not to be too flowery and softly spoken in this video. I'm personally sick of the video essay format. The marriage stories made me feel like I had a family again and then lost it all in the same day. In this video, I'm going to talk about the thematic similarities between the three Tarantino films, Inglourious Basterds, Django Unchained, and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and how these similarities shape these films to form a sort of unofficial trilogy similar to the likes of the Dollars or the Cornetto trilogy. Now, Tarantino is a director who, despite being one of the most popular and famous filmmakers working today, is someone whose work is still widely overlooked. For the most part, he's seen as that goofy director who loves violence, kung fu, gangsters, guns, swearing, sharp dialogue, movies within movies, cigarettes, feet, and by all means, none of that is untrue. But I feel that the majority of people, both his fans and detractors, don't fully appreciate the thematic nuances that go into his films. Located throughout all his work are intelligent observations and critiques toward American history, the history of film, and the history of art and storytelling. Most paramount, however, is his exploration of the profound relationship between world history and the history of art, and where these two phenomenons intersect in almost synchronistic fashions. The key similarities between these three films of Tarantino's, however, is that they're all historical period pieces that depict their own rendition of pivotal moments throughout history. We have World War II and the Nazi occupation of Europe with Inglourious Basterds, the American slave trade with Django Unchained, and the eclipse of the golden age of Hollywood and the Manson family massacres with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. What Tarantino does differently to all other period pieces, however, is he reimagines his own made-up proceedings of events to draw on real ideas and emotions that are synonymous with the given time period. They're more so intended to be interpreted as metaphors of the historical occasions rather than true-to-life retellings. More precisely, however, is he revisits these quintessential moments with satisfyingly brutal stories of vengeance and justice. The Inglourious Basterds mercilessly butcher the National Socialist Army, sculpting the slain in true Native American fashion, having the Bear Jew ceremoniously execute hostages by beating them to death with a baseball bat. The film ends with the Nazi high command being simultaneously pumped full of lead, burned alive and blown up, accompanied with a close-up of Hitler's face being torn to shit by bullets. Django Unchained sees a black slave rise to freedom and empowerment as he becomes a legendary Western hero who shoots the shit out of the utterly reprehensible slavers. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood tells a much more reserved slice-of-life story for the majority of its runtime, only softly hinting at the presence of the Manson family in Los Angeles until finally it culminates with that gruesome ending. History is once again subverted and our two lead characters dispense of the Manson family murderers in typical Tarantino fashion. The justice that all of these films' characters deal to the antagonistic forces are unrelenting and extreme. Very few directors would go to these violent extremes that Tarantino frequently visits in his films. But out of the vast majority of all movie makers, he knows how to utilize extreme violence in cinema the best. He has his lead characters use it to combat antagonists who appear to be the embodiment of pure evil. He creates anti-heroes who wield extreme violence to fight against the extreme evils adopted by the movie's villains. The prejudice at which the Inglourious Basterds lay waste to the Nazis is in direct response and opposition to the real-life prejudice that the Nazis inflicted upon the Jewish people. Their core narrative function is to mercilessly massacre the Nazis to the same ruthless degree that Hitler intended to dominate the rest of the world in. It's a situation and setting where this sadistic level of aggression is completely justified. The idea of the all-evil villain is an archetype we only expect to see through the lens of fiction. We're supposed to believe that in reality human beings are far more morally complex and grey. Every so often, however, humanity spirals down to embody an evil so vast that they begin to resemble one of these irredeemable, pure pure evil villains we see in literature. The Nazi regime was perhaps the most poignant example of this kind of phenomenon, and it's no wonder that post-war Western cinema began to endlessly pastiche Nazi tyranny when depicting fictional villains.
Nazis. I hate these guys.
The Emperor is an antagonist who, in vanquishing, you eliminate nothing but malevolence. Demolishing pure evil is a totally righteous endeavour. In the real world, the idea of demolishing an enemy is seen as extreme and of fascist mentality. But because the Nazis were themselves the most fascistic of all, who sought to annihilate millions of people on the basis of total hate, they propped themselves up as the absolute immorality of mankind that needed to be abolished completely. The Bastards are an almost equally extreme band of fascists working on the side of good, a direct countermeasure with the same savage magnitude. They go about their ways with the mentality that the Nazis need to be completely and utterly obliterated. By doing so, they eradicate almost nothing but pure hate.
Nazi ain't got no humanity. They're the foot soldiers of a Jew-hating, mass-murdering maniac, and they need to be destroyed. That's why any and every sumbitch we find wearing a Nazi uniform, they're gonna die.
An anti-Nazi stance essentially just translates to an anti-evil stance, therefore a pro-good stance. That's why we witness them commit macabre acts of violence against the Nazi forces without ever condemning them for it. The same kind of logic can also be attributed to slavers and serial killers. It's hard to label Calvin Candy as an over-the-top mustache-twirling villain because people like this actually existed. The catalogue of antagonists from Quentin's films feature some of the most vile human beings put to screen, many of which always meet with an overtly gruesome and satisfyingly cruel end at the hands of an infinitely admirable anti-hero. Butch Coolidge hacking the sodomites up with a samurai sword, whilst Marcellus Wallace blows Ed's scrotum to smithereens with a shotgun, is one of the most satisfying moments in all of cinema.
I'ma call a couple of hard pipe-hitting niggas to go to work on the homes here with a pair of pliers and a blowtorch. I ain't through with you by damn sight. I'ma get medieval on your ass.
Uma Thurman fucking up those necrophiles wasn't too bad either. What's that Bible quote about God's wrath raining down upon the wicked again?
And you will know my name is the Lord when I lay my vengeance upon thee.
Scalp Herman.
Few other directors go to these violent extremes when depicting revenge, and perhaps that's why Tarantino's films give off such a profound sense of retribution, unakin to the works of any other filmmaker. In addition to the settings that Tarantino chooses for his revenge stories to take place in, equally as crucial is the characters who enact the vengeance. Each of the prominent characters throughout these three films are walking representations of real historical archetypes, all of which are acting on the behalf of specific societal cultures when they take revenge on various embodiments of the oppressive regimes and ideologies throughout history. First and foremost, we have the obvious example of Django, who is a freed slave turned bounty hunter who takes revenge on the American slavery institution on behalf of all the African Americans who were oppressed by that monumental event. The whipping scene is perhaps the most evocative of this particular emotion. The image of the white man whipping the black slave is a universal portrait everyone holds in their minds when they think of the slave trade. Tarantino reimagines this image to act as a source of empowerment and cathartic revenge for black people. As a freed slave donning slick, sophisticated clothing, wields this symbol of black oppression and unleashes it back upon the tyrannical white slavers with glorious ferocity. In this film, all of the different iterations of racism are personified and then swiftly murdered by our protagonists. The KKK get kaboomed. Calvin Candy is a recognisable breed of figureheads from that era also, a wealthy, arrogant, entitled, vicious, ignorant, obnoxious tycoon with a vast empire of land and industry. More profoundly, however, is the use of the understated character character of Stephen, the domesticated slave, a manifestation of the internal self-hating persona instilled into the black people by the white man. His old age represents the gradual breaking down of the African American's collective soul and spirit over the hundreds of years of inhumane subjugation, perhaps the most insidious form of racism, which is why Django leaves him for last.
All you black folks, I suggest you get away from all these white folks. Not you, Stephen. You right where you belong.
Additionally, I always loved how Dr. Schultz was German. Something about his German heritage made him all the more endearing within this dark historical setting. Turns out that during those times, Germany were much less entangled with the slave trade than other countries such as Britain, America and France. Schultz's worldview was formed outside the shroud of the pro-slavery ideologies of America. Thus, he has an impartial, non-prejudiced mentality towards African Americans and is sympathetic towards Django's struggle. The bastards of Inglourious Bastards are Jewish American soldiers. The revenge they're instigating is on behalf of the broad stretch of the Jewish population, as well as the American soldiers who combated the Nazis head-on. Shoshana's plight, on the other hand, is a far more personal vendetta against the Third Reich. She's a French Jew who was subjugated first-hand by the regime, hence her vengeance is carried out solely for the direct victims of the Holocaust. Whilst the Bastards provide a more masculine and comedic revenge story arc, Shoshana's is the sentimental alternative that acts as the emotional core of the film. We're so used to seeing the European Jew being hideously oppressed by the Nazis through all the various World War II era films that seeing a French Jewish woman adopt the demeanour of a masculine Rambo-esque action hero is just so fucking cool. Other additional characters such as Archie Hickox can also be interpreted as a stand-in for the British archetype that was equally prominent during World War II. Fassbender can be seen keenly embodying your typical suave, well-spoken Englishman eccentricity.
If you offered me a scotch and plain water, I could drink a scotch and plain water. Well, if this is it, old boy, I hope you don't mind if I go out speaking to kings.
Another, more obvious aspect to the Bastards is that they are quite literally walking American stereotypes.
You probably heard we ain't in the prisoner-taking business. We in the killing Nazi business. And cousin, business is booming.
Oh, isn't that just dandy?
That's a pretty exciting story. What's next? Lies on Ice?
The film is utterly unapologetic in how it depicts these brash Yankee soldiers with their unyielding bloodlust and self-assured mindset. The Bear Jew's weapon of choice is a baseball bat, a staple of American culture that is used to crudely and ceremoniously execute the Nazi soldiers. The Bastards are both a critique and celebration of American patriotism. You view the character of Aldo Raine to be a preposterously loud caricature of an American lieutenant, yet all the while you're on his side and can't help but view him as a total fucking badass.
You know, fighting in a basement offers a lot of difficulties. Number one being, you're fighting in a basement.
The forceful masculinity of the United States' cocksure mentality is a welcome ally against these mass-murdering tyrants.
And the German will be sickened by us. And the German will talk about us. And the German will fear us.
Where Tarantino takes these ideas of archetypes and representations further is he not only personifies aspects of real-world history and culture, but more principally aspects of film history and culture. Those who grew up with the films of the 60s and 70s instantly recognise the character duo of Cliff Booth and Rick Dalton as a clear harkening back to the iconic duo of Robert Redford and Paul Newman. They have all the characteristics of the old-fashioned American heroes from that era of cinema. Cliff Booth most especially, his modest and collected tough guy exterior accompanied with his thick western accent.
Hey! You're Rick fucking Dalton. Don't you forget it.
In true Clint Eastwood spirit, he's a man of few words, but when he does speak, he knows exactly what to say and how to say it.
I think all that lethal weapon horse shit is just an excuse so you dancers never have to get in a real fight.
Rick Dalton, on the other hand, being the actor, is emblematic of the more eccentric and extroverted persona, more akin to the charms of your Paul Newmans, your Warren Beatty's.
Here I am, flat on my ass, and who I got living next door to me? The director of Rosemary's fucking Baby, that's who.
Primarily, however, Dalton and his story are an encapsulation of that key turning point in Hollywood as the laid-back Western optimism of American cinema began to dwindle. Now, Tarantino is often criticised for his masturbatory glamorization of film. I counter that critique with the plea that, at least in the case for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Tarantino only chiefly romanticizes the genuinely endearing aspects of Hollywood. Rick Dalton's most pivotal moments come from the scenes in which he and a modest film crew are in the creative process of shooting scenes for a small Western TV show. All of the ulterior aspects of Hollywood, such as fame, pride and money, are pulled away from the screen, and we are left with nothing more than this group of passionate filmmakers and actors, all working together and trying their very best to create good escapism. That's what Hollywood is really about. That's what movies are all about, and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, if nothing else, is a persistent endorsement of that emotion.
You got me covered up in all this, this junk. How's the audience gonna know it's me?
I hope they don't.
Rick's slow coming to terms with his situation as he forgets his vanity and commits himself to the performance in front of him is a strong story of humility. He's so wrapped up with his diminishing celebrity stature, he needs a 10-year-old girl to remind him what acting is all about. It's not about him, it's about the scene, it's about the character, about the art, and by doing all of this, he finally attains true happiness and accomplishment, if only for a brief instance.
That was the best acting I've ever seen in my whole life.
Like you.
It's all one last celebration of the art form before Hollywood changes forever.
Rick fucking Dalton.
Margot Robbie in the role of Sharon Tate is perhaps the most severe example of a character being more of an idea than an actual person throughout all the works of Tarantino. A recurrent criticism when the film came out was with her lack of character or an arc. She spends the entire runtime doing nothing other than dancing to 60s music, singing to the car radio, going to star-studded parties and watching movies at the theatre. She has very little dialogue as she's on her own for the majority of the scenes she's in. The Sharon Tate character is meant to serve as another personification of Hollywood, only unlike Rick Dalton or Cliff Booth, we're only supposed to observe her on an objective level. Her being based off a real person who suffered a horrible fate, it's more tasteful that her character is minimalistic. The aspect of 60s Hollywood that she embodies is that of the optimistic innocence. Her passive role in the film is a fitting parallel for the collective passivity embodied by LA during that period. We get to witness her go about day-to-day activities, all of which encapsulate, in their own way, 60s Californian culture. We know, or at least we think we know, her fate, but the film just sits back and lets her take in all the pleasures around her.
I'm here to pick up the first edition of Thomas Hardy's Test the D'Urbervilles I ordered. It's under Polanski.
Yeah, you're talking books there, kid.
Oh, I know. Isn't it wonderful?
Man.
I just read it.
Her going to the movie theatre to watch a film she stars in is another moment where the film stops to celebrate the cinema-going experience, as well as the craft of acting. Though she doesn't say anything, her character comes across as truly charming in this scene. We see that she's humbled by the other audience members enjoying her performance. For the entire runtime, she emits only joyful emotions and is unfalteringly at peace. She relishes in all the wholesome delights of the era, blissfully taking her time. For now, she's spared the horror that's to come, cloaked in the calming embrace of Californian optimism. So yeah, that's why her character's portrayed that way, you fucktards.
And I just wanted to know why that was, that we don't hear her actually speaking very much. And Margot, I wanted you to also comment about being in the film in this part.
Well, I just reject your hypotheses.
Imagine accusing the guy who made Jackie Brown and Kill Bill of sexism. It would almost be like accusing the guy who made Django Unchained of being a racist. The film's slow pace can also be thematically justified by this same theme. It was a time of relative tranquility in Hollywood. The movie industry wasn't quite the corporate enterprise it is today, hastily pumping out blockbusters left and right in production line fashion. It was a healthy balance of art and industry with Hollywood back then. There was a cheerful breeze in the air, a calm one collective, at least in some regard. However, period piece movies such as these do run risk of over-glamorizing the era they're showcasing. Directors often become swept up in their own biased nostalgia. Tarantino, for the most part, romanticizes the aspects that are actually worthy of romanticization. The craft of storytelling, the intimate film crews, the humble, small-time actors, going to the cinema, watching TV with your best friend.
Uh-oh. Here comes trouble.
Boom!
Oh man, right in the face.
And whilst he celebrates these positive attributes, he also takes some time aside to make fun of the more scandalous Hollywood traits. He's fully aware of all the negative characteristics of these past eras. Blatant racism for one.
Don't cry in front of the Mexicans.
One of the European westerns that Dalton stars in, titled Red Blood, Red Skin, is a direct jab at the heavily frequent anti-Native American subject matter adopted by a substantial amount of western movies from old Hollywood.
Red Blood, Red Skin, based on the Floyd Ray Wilson novel, The Only Good Indian is a Dead Indian.
The portrayal of Bruce Lee is meant to illustrate how self-deluded some of these Hollywood legends actually were, especially those who people hold on godlike pedestals and immortalize to absurd degrees. Is it that difficult to imagine that someone who's constantly being told by everyone around them that no other human in the world could beat them in a fight might possibly develop an enormous ego?
You're laughing at what I'm saying, but I'm not saying anything funny. So what do you think is so funny?
Cliff Booth's backstory surrounding his wife's death on a boat alludes to the real-life death of Natalie Wood, which many believe to have been at the hands of her husband, Robert Wagner. The inclusion of this specific subplot satirizes the shady lives of certain prominent celebrities who were around back then. People even spoke of Wagner as the guy who killed his own wife and got away with it.
Killed his wife and got away with it.
Tarantino also likes to make fun of his audiences by including utterances of self-critique within his work, often angled at the characters he's written or the actual film itself. As previously mentioned, all of Quentin's films see violent anti-heroes as their lead characters. His protagonists always possess a sadistic edge to them that give them a moral greyness. Cliff Booth is one who is always presented in a morally ambiguous light. The bastards are, as described, bastards. It's the title of the film. They're a complete mockery of the macho, self-aggrandizing American soldier exterior.
British American? What? We're American.
The fact that the bastards scalp the Nazis in Native American fashion and that Aldo earns the nickname Aldo the Apache is also a nice little drip of irony, seeing as though they're bringing justice to oppressive tyrants with traditions used by the race of peoples that they brutally oppressed in the past. It's all a big black comedy. The film blatantly points out how stupid their final mission plan is when they're trying to infiltrate the theatre. And despite who the target is, they're still all a group of suicide bombers. The very ruthless nature of this mission isn't swept under the rug either, because you have this line from Hans Lander.
Explosive still around the ankle, still ready to explode, and your mission? Some would call it terrorist plot.
Similarly, Django Unchained makes the point of having this scene in the movie to remind the audience of the cold-hearted nature of our two lead heroes.
Do you want to save your wife by doing what I do? This is what I do. I kill people and sell their corpses for cash. This corpse is worth $7,000. Now quit your pussyfooting and shoot him.
Inglourious Basterds might be Tarantino's best film title, as it befits the personas of all of his main characters. That scene in the beginning of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where Al Pacino's character is describing his experiences viewing Rick Dalton's films, is a meta-commentary on Tarantino's whole career. Pacino, who is euphoric in his visceral reaction to the violence of Dalton's filmography, is a direct parody of the average Tarantino fan.
Yeah, that is so much fun.
All the shooting.
He exhibits that same breed of enthusiasm that we evoke when we watch one of Quentin's films.
I love that stuff, you know, the killing.
And then Dalton tops it all off with a smirking remark at how violent his/Tarantino's films are.
A lot of killing, a lot of killing, a lot of killing.
All the shooting.
What a picture. What a picture. Good picture.
The fictitious film The 14 Fists of McCluskey that Dalton starred in is an unmistakable reference to Inglourious Basterds. The flamethrower scene we are shown is a hilarious jape at the over-the-top and perverse nature of that film.
Burn, you Nazi bastards!
It's Quentin making fun of how extreme he can go with his films, to a borderline immature extent.
Why the need for so much gruesome, graphic violence? Why not let us imagine
Because it's so much fun, Jan. Get it?
As previously mentioned, all his characters not only represent historical archetypes, but cinematic archetypes as well. However, the key attribute that solidifies the thematic relationship between these three films is the concept of film itself triumphing over evil. Django enacts his revenge in true spaghetti western fashion. He embodies this iconic movie persona as a means of empowerment. Simultaneously, Tarantino directs the action scenes in the pulpy style of those old westerns, making the revenge we see on screen all the more gratifying as we get our fill of blood. It's almost as if the western film genre itself is punishing the slavers. The headstrong forcefulness exhibited by Aldo and the Bastards is done so to echo the cartoon-like American heroes from old patriotic war films. The rowdy, obstinate soldiers you typically see in anti-Nazi, anti-fascist American cinema. And similar to Django, the very way in which the revenge scenes are shot in are visual pastiches to that category of American movies such as Where Eagles Dare and The Dirty Dozen.
We're gonna be doing one thing, and one thing only. Killing Nazis.
In contrast, Shoshana, who is the more grounded and sympathetic character, is a quiet embodiment of French cinema. Unlike the overt bastards, she has all the subtle characteristics and nuances that are synonymous with French filmmaking. Her revenge plan is far more sophisticated and discreet.
Vers le milieu de la troisième, tu descends, tu fermes la salle à clé, t'attends mon signal. Mon signal.
Correcto.
The whole thing is literally a battle between cinema cultures, American and French film versus the Nazi propaganda of Joseph Goebbels.
Goebbels considers the films he's making to be the beginning of a new era in German cinema, an alternative to what he considers the Jewish German intellectual cinema of the 20s and the Jewish-controlled dogma of Hollywood.
Archie Hickox is literally a film critic sent on an undercover mission for his knowledge of German cinema. Additionally, his Richard Burton demeanour places him as the advocate for British film, specifically incorporating the characteristics of the British spy genre.
Don't worry, she's a British spy. She'll make the rendezvous.
And seeing how his central role in the film is that of espionage, that notion is all the more feasible. The Nazi elites end up being scorched alive by nitrate film. They're literally being killed by film. Moments prior they were relishing in the fictitious Nazi propaganda film Nation's Pride, which is meant to run as a blatant parallel to the Inglourious Basterds film itself. Technically, you could classify the film you're watching as violent propaganda, but when you say anti-Nazi propaganda, you're really just saying pro-good propaganda, and at that point it just stops being propaganda altogether. It's all highlighting the hilarious fact that this film is essentially morally justified propaganda. By that merit, Bastards may be the only critically acclaimed pro-war film that exists in the modern landscape. Hitler, Goebbels and the rest of the Third Reich all guffaw and cackle as they witness the endless butchering of the Allied forces, utterly unbeknownst to the fact that they're being laughed at in the exact same way by we who are watching this film. They're about to get totally fucked. Ultimately, the Nazis are the final source of ridicule.
Actually, we're all tickled to hear you say that. Quite frankly, watching Donnie beat Nazis to death is the closest we ever get to going to the movies.
The ending of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood evokes the same realm of emotions. Since Rick and Cliff have been heavily fleshed out from their lengthy time on screen, this ending hits quite a margin deeper emotionally. We arrive at the night where Sharon Tate is meant to have been murdered. For Tarantino, this marked the abrupt end of that tranquil era of Hollywood. On that night, the Manson family defiled the serene zeitgeist of late 60s California, as they incited an onslaught of vicious, mindless hate upon the innocent. innocent, but Tarantino gives us an alternative resolution that bypasses the bitter reality of what truly happened. In typical gruesome style that befits the director's infamous trademarks, Cliff Booth and Rick Dalton annihilate Tex and his gang of killers. Hollywood's innocence is defended and championed by these two badasses who evoke all the characteristics of your classic Hollywood leads. The charismatic frontman and the talented quiet killer. It's literally like watching Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid jump from out of the screen to reality and kick the absolute shit out of these miserable cowardly murderers.
I say we cut their cocks off and make them eat it.
Rick Dalton even wields his iconic movie weapon to vanquish one of the killers, in turn becoming the hero that priorly he'd only feigned being through the facade of acting. I don't think I've ever experienced more elation while watching a film than when I saw Rick Dalton donning his flamethrower and setting that demonic cultist on fire in a glorious blaze of justice. For just this movie, for just this instance, Sharon Tate is spared the horrendous fate that she met with on that infamous night, and that era of Hollywood is allowed to conclude in peace, unbesmirched by that atrocious incident.
Is everybody okay?
Yes, Sharon, everybody's fine.
Are you okay?
Well, yes, I am. Thank you for asking that.
Once Upon a Time in Hollywood ends with the bittersweet vision for a more symphonic end to the golden age of Hollywood, one where the seed of its future can flourish and grow in a calm environment. Wouldn't it have been brilliant if two virtuous mean motherfuckers laid waste to the Manson cultists? If a slave had risen to freedom and become a badass cowboy who gunned down white slavers? If a squad of savage, cutthroat American Jews befell on the Nazis with such ferocity that they instilled pure terror into the psyche of the Third Reich? If only the spirit of film could kill. So there you have it. Tarantino's a smarter guy than you think. I hope this video's given you a new perspective on his work. Maybe you'll watch his films through an entirely different lens now after that genius video essay. Or maybe you disagreed with everything I said in this video and it's been a complete waste of everyone's time. Regardless, I had fun making this video. This has been a video idea that I've wanted to do ever since I started making videos back in October last year. I'm glad I did it. It's out there now for anyone to see, anyone to criticise, anyone to shit on. See you next time. The next wank you have can be on me.